All right, today we're going to work on our last set of notes for the week. Tomorrow you're going to have an activity that practices what you've learned today. So today our notes are going to be over mean absolute deviation. So what I have is just a sheet that has a couple of examples just to kind of save me from having to write everything out. You'll have them there that you can look at. I put it on RenWeb. You can print it off if you want to, but you don't have to have it printed off if you don't want to. On this page, I'm actually going to give you a couple of notes first. So I'm going to turn it over to the other side and then kind of explain what we're talking about. So we're looking at mean absolute deviation. Now, this is one of those things that you kind of never really seem to talk about, but basically what it's saying is if you look at the word mean, you think of average. If you're finding the mean of something, you're finding the average. So it's average absolute deviation. So you're essentially trying to figure out how far is each data set on average deviating from that mean. So that seems confusing, but for example, if I were to give a test and the average test grade was, we'll say, an 85, but the mean absolute deviation was a pretty high number, then the higher the number is, the more your data set actually varies from the mean. So if my mean absolute deviation is high, then that means that most of the data points weren't centered around 85. There was actually a big range or a big variety of different test grades. On the other hand, if I gave a test, your mean absolute deviation is a low number, then that means that the data that I have is very, very close to the mean or the average of the data. So that means that most people actually made pretty close to an 85 on the test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to write it out and do it by hand first, but I'm only going to do one example like that because honestly, I need you to have the understanding of how to do it. But honestly, if you have a calculator, then do it on a calculator. All right, so the mean absolute deviation, just the definition itself, is the average of the absolute values, of the differences. It's very mathy, but it'll make more sense when you see it, between the mean and the data values. So it's the average of the absolute values of the differences between the mean and the data values. So basically what you're doing is you're finding the mean of the data or the average of the data. Then you're taking each piece of it and you're doing a simple problem. It's the absolute value of the mean minus whatever the data value is. So you're finding the distance away from the mean. And then you're finding the average of that. So you're finding the average 2 times. So when you're doing this by hand, it can kind of take a while and kind of be annoying. But once again, I want you to know how to do it by hand, just so that you have that knowledge. And then I'm going to show you how to do it on the calculator. So the steps for doing that, the first thing that you need to do is you need to first find the mean. So you're finding the average of whatever your data is. The second step is to do the absolute value of the mean minus each data piece. Your third step is to add all the values from step 2. And then your last step is going to be divide by the total values of data. So divide by the total values or amount of data pieces. Okay, so if we turn it over, we've got the first one right here. We're finding the mean absolute deviation. So our step number 1 is to actually find the mean. So you can use a calculator on this part. You know that when you are finding the mean, you add them together, you divide by how many there are. So I'm going to be adding 12, 5, 8, 7, 6, 10, and 11. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So just like we were doing yesterday, make sure that you go back and count, make sure that you have them all there, because obviously it's going to throw off your mean if you've forgotten some of it. So we add those together and we're going to get that is 59. To find the mean or the average of these, we now have to divide it by how many there are. And we just counted them up and there are 7. So we're going to do 59 divided by 7, which gives us approximately 8.43. I'll just round to the nearest hundredth. So the average number that's here is about 8.43. Some of them are more, some of them are less, but this is the average of them. All right, so that part you've done before. The next part is the new part. So on the next part, or step number 2, this is where you have to find the absolute value or the distance away from the mean that each of these are. So you're finding the absolute value of the mean minus this data value. So 8.43 minus 12, then 8.43 minus 5, then 8.43 minus 8, and minus 7. Kind of rewrite these over here. 8.43 minus 6, 8.43 minus 10, and 8.43 minus 11. So for each of those, you're going to be finding whatever this value is and go ahead and write it right there. So you can use a calculator if you want to. If you want to do it by hand, whatever way is fine. So we have negative 3.57. Then we have, in that case, 8.43. And you can do it on your calculator. So this is going to be 0.43. This is going to be 1.43. This is going to be 2.43. Negative 1.57, and make sure that you actually don't put the negatives there because this is an absolute value. And then that absolute value is 2.57. So we've found the mean. Then we have subtracted and found the distance away that each of these are from the mean. And we're basically going to have to find the mean again. So we're going to use our calculator. Remember, there should be no negatives here because we're dealing with absolute value. So we have 3.57 plus 3.43 plus 0.43. And we end up, when we add them all together, we end up with 15.43. And we know that there are 7 total, which means that the mean absolute deviation is going to be approximately 2.2. So that's saying that on average, each of these data pieces are about 2.2 units, whatever that unit may be, away from the actual average or the actual mean in this problem. So if the average is about 8.43, most of them, the average away from it is about 2. So kind of plus or minus 2 from this amount. I'm going to do the next one, but the next one, actually the next 2, I'm going to show you how to do it on your calculator. It will be much, much quicker. So when we do it on a calculator, then we want to make sure, well, we can just do it in this. So go to your stat button, and then number 1 is edit. And we're going to clear out anything that's there if there is something there. So in list 1, I want to actually type in what it says, what I have. So we're actually going to do number 2 here. And in list 1, I'm going to put all of the values for number 2. So 98, then 54, then 70, 82, 66, and 88. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there are 6 in there. This is the same thing that we've been doing so far. Once you've got everything in there, then go to stat again. We're going to calculate. We're going to look at the one variable stats. So number 1, press enter and press enter again. And the first thing that you see is that X with the line over it, that actually represents the mean. So the mean is listed as X with the line over it. So the average or the mean here is going to be 76.3. So what this is saying is the average of these values right there are about 76. Some are higher, some are lower. Now, here's the cool thing. What I want you to do in order to do the next part where we have to find the mean absolute deviation, then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to stat, edit, but I want you to scroll over to list 2 and you need to highlight the L2. And press enter and it'll take you down here. Now, this part, we know that we're trying to find the absolute value of the mean minus every one of the data values. So what we can do is we can set this to do it for us. So go to second and then 0, and then that brings up a catalog of different things that your calculator can do. But the very first thing on there is absolute value. So I want you to press the first thing. So what you're doing is you're finding the absolute value. And just like on 1, we did the mean minus the data value. So the mean in this case that we just found was 76.3. So we need to do the absolute value of 76.3 minus the data values. All of the data values are listed in list 1. So to do that, if you look above your numbers on your calculator, there's a yellow number, or mine is yellow. I don't know what color yours is, but mine is yellow. And I can see that the one above the number 1 is L1. So if I press second and then L1, it shows up here. So I am telling list 2 to calculate the absolute value of the mean that we just found minus list 1. And I press enter and it actually does it for us. So it takes care of this step right here for us. Now, the last thing that we want to do to find the mean absolute deviation is we want to go to stat and then calculate. And we want to do one variable stats again. However, we don't want to use list one. We're finding the mean again, just like we did here, but now we're finding the mean of list two. So what you're going to do is in the one variable stats, type in second and the number 2, and now you've told it to find the one variable stats for list 2. So press enter, and it tells you the average. So just like we said before, the mean absolute deviation is the mean of all of these numbers. So I'm looking for the mean here, and that is 13. So what this is telling us about this particular data set is that each of these are on average about 13 away from the average of the whole set. So once again, if this was a set of tests, somebody did well, somebody did not so well, kind of average, they failed, and they did pretty well too. So you kind of have a big range. So what this is saying is this mean absolute deviation is telling me that yes, this is my average. 76.3 is an average, the test average. However, it kind of varies pretty greatly from whatever the data is telling me. All right, and example number 3, I'm going to do the same thing as number 2. I'm going to show you how to do it using the calculator again. So number 3 is an actual word problem. It's an actual real life example of a time in which the mean absolute deviation could be used. So number 3 says employees at a law firm keep track of how many hours they work each week. So there was 5 people there, and this is the amount that each of those 5 people worked. We're going to find and interpret, make sure that when you see the word interpret, that you actually use words to describe what this means. Find and interpret the mean absolute deviation. So just a reminder, you're going to go to stat, and then we're going to edit list 1. And you put in list 1 exactly what you are given. You are given the hours that 5 employees worked each week. So 44, 48, 44, 40, and 59. And you can see, just make note that when you're looking at this data right here, you can see that the first 4 are relatively close together, but there is an outlier, and that outlier is 59. So whenever you have an outlier, then you can just plan on your mean to be slightly higher or significantly higher or lower than what most of your data states. So we'll find the mean first. So the mean of this data is found by then going to stat, to the right one to calculate, and we're looking at the one variable statistics or one variable stats. It automatically has you look up or calculate the stats for list 1. So we don't have to press anything there. And it shows us that the mean for these 5 numbers is 47. And then we've got to find the mean absolute deviation. So the mean absolute deviation is found when you go to stat, edit again, but we're going to keep list 1 the same. We're going to change list 2. And we're basically giving list 2 a command. And that command is to find the absolute value of the mean minus each individual data set. So we're trying to find the distance away from the mean that each of these values are. So make sure that the L2 is highlighted, and then you're going to go to press enter so that your cursor is blinking down here. Go to second 0 or to the catalog, and the first one is absolute value. So now we've got to tell it to what to find the absolute value of. You're finding the absolute value of the mean, which was 47, minus all of list 1. So we can press second and the number 1 and then close those parentheses. So saying find the absolute value of the mean minus list 1 and press enter. And it will do that for you automatically. So up here, when we found the mean absolute deviation, that's when we found the average of all of these values, all of those distances away from the mean. So if I want to find all of the averages of the distances away from the mean, I very simply have to find the average of list 2. So we'll go to stat, calculate, one variable statistics. But remember, in this case, you want to specify that you're trying to find the mean absolute deviation or the mean of list 2. So second list 2 or L2. Make sure that that's in there. Otherwise, it's going to calculate list 1 for you and press enter. And in doing that, we find that that average is 5.2. So what this is saying is that the average amount that people worked was 47 hours a week. But on average, the actual amount that they worked was about 5.2 hours away from this. So it could be 5.2 hours more or 5.2 hours less. So it's not a huge number, but it kind of makes a big difference if you're paying. So if I worked 5 or 6 hours more than what I thought, then that would be me making more money. Or if I worked less, then me making less money. So the last part, we just found that the mean absolute deviation in this problem was 5.2. And I got it right. We now need to interpret what the mean absolute deviation means. So what the mean absolute deviation means, it means that the actual amount of hours worked by each employee is about 5.2 hours away from the mean or the average hours worked. So what you guys can do, there's an assignment that's listed on RenWeb, and you guys can work on that assignment, turn it in as you normally do, email it to me, text it to me, just make sure that I can see it. I don't mind if you use your calculator on this. In fact, please use your calculator on this. It'll save you a lot of time. If you have any questions about what's expected or you don't understand something, go ahead and email me, or there will also be a Google Meet at 1 today. So if you have a question about something, just hop on that and let me know. Other than that, I hope that y'all have a wonderful spring break. You want to say hi?
Hi.
You want to show them your picture that I have to use? What's on your picture?
Flowers.
Flowers on your picture. All right. Say happy spring break.
Happy spring break.
Bye.